Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands and looked at the broken fuel pump on his workbench for the third time that day, wondering if the universe had any bigger plans for him than fixing old equipment on a station that nobody cared about. He was 34 years old, and he had spent the last 12 years working as a maintenance engineer on Orbital Station Data 7, a small outpost at the edge of human space where nothing exciting ever happened, and where dreams went to die quietly. The notification came through his personal terminal with a soft chime that he almost ignored because he thought it was another reminder about his overdue equipment reports. But something made him look. The message was from the Office of Terran Military Inheritance, a department he did not even know existed, and it said that he had been named the sole heir to the estate of Commodore. Alara Vance Marcus read the name 3 times and felt nothing because he had never heard of this person in his entire life. He searched the name on the station database and found very little information. Just a brief entry that said Commodore Vance had died defending the Kepler colony 60 years ago in a battle that remained classified to this day. The inheritance consisted of a single item, a ship that had been held in a secure military impound. Since her death, Marcus laughed out loud in his empty workshop because this had to be some kind of mistake or maybe a joke from his coworkers, who liked to tease him about his boring life. But the message included official verification codes that checked out when he ran them through the system, and it included travel documents that would take him to a location he had never heard of, a place called Depot Omega 9. His supervisor gave him leave without much argument because nothing on the station would fall apart without him for a few weeks, or at least nothing that would not fall apart anyway. The transport ship took 3 days to reach the depot, and Marcus spent most of that time wondering what kind of rusted old hulk was waiting for him. He imagined a small patrol vessel with failing systems and outdated weapons, something that might be worth a few thousand credits if he sold it for scrap. When the transport dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Depot Omega 9, Marcus pressed his face against the viewport and saw a facility that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. The depot was built into an asteroid, and its exterior lights flickered weakly, as if the power systems were running on their last reserves. A shuttle took him down to the main hangar, where 3 officials in crisp military uniforms were waiting for him, with expressions that seemed nervous in a way that made Marcus feel uncomfortable. The lead official was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, who introduced herself as Director Yamamoto. She explained that they had been waiting for someone to claim this inheritance for 6 decades, and that many people had tried before, but none of them had the right genetic markers. Marcus did not understand what genetic markers had to do with inheriting a ship, but he followed the officials through long corridors that were dimly lit and covered in dust. They walked for almost 20 minutes through the abandoned facility until they reached a massive set of blast doors that looked like they could withstand a nuclear strike. Director Yamamoto stopped and turned to face Marcus with an expression he could not read. She told him that what he was about to see was classified at the highest level, and that he would need to sign documents agreeing never to speak about it to anyone without authorization. Marcus signed the documents because he had come too far to turn back now, and because his curiosity had grown with every step through this strange place. The blast doors opened slowly with a grinding sound that echoed through the empty corridors. Beyond them was a hangar so large that Marcus could not see the far walls, and in the center of that hangar sat a ship that made him stop breathing for several seconds. It was not the rusted hulk he had imagined. The vessel was sleek and beautiful, with a hull that seemed to absorb light itself, colored in a shade of black so deep that it looked like a hole cut into reality. It was easily twice the size of any dreadnought Marcus had ever seen in the Terran fleet, and its design was unlike anything in the current military catalog. Director Yamamoto explained that the ship was called Adamantine Resolve, and that it had been sitting in this hangar since the day Commodore Vance died. She also explained that in 60 years, no one had been able to open it. They had tried everything from cutting tools to explosives to advanced hacking techniques, but the ship had refused to respond to any attempted entry. Marcus walked toward the vessel in a daze and felt something strange building in his chest. A feeling like recognition, even though he had never seen this ship before. The officials followed behind him at a distance, as if they were afraid to get too close. When Marcus reached the main airlock, he raised his hand without really thinking about it and pressed his palm against the cold surface of the hull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship came alive. Lights cascaded across the black hull in patterns that looked like rivers of blue fire flowing through hidden channels in the metal. A deep humming sound filled the hangar as systems that had been dormant for 60 years began to wake up. The airlock door slid open with a soft hiss and warm air flowed out from inside the ship, carrying a scent that reminded Marcus of his grandmother's house for reasons he could not explain. Director Yamato and the other officials stood frozen in place with expressions of pure shock on their faces. Marcus turned to look at them and saw that some of them had tears in their eyes. He did not understand why until Director Yamato spoke in a voice that trembled slightly. She said that they had been waiting 60 years for this moment. She said that the ship had finally found its new Captain. Marcus looked back at the open airlock and the soft blue lights that glowed inside, and he felt his entire life changing in ways he could not yet comprehend. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door closed behind him, and Marcus Chun, maintenance engineer from a forgotten station at the edge of nowhere, began to discover that some inheritances carry the weight of worlds. The interior of the adamantine resolve was nothing like Marcus had expected, and he found himself standing in a corridor that seemed to pulse with gentle blue light as if the ship itself was breathing. The walls were smooth and warm to the touch, and covered with patterns that looked like circuits, but also like veins running through living tissue. Marcus walked forward slowly and felt the ship responding to his presence in ways he could not explain. Lights brightening as he approached and doors opening before he reached them. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was neither male nor female, but something in between, and it carried a warmth that made Marcus feel like he was being welcomed home after a long journey. The voice introduced itself as VIGIL, the ship's artificial intelligence, and it said that it had been waiting for Marcus for a very long time. Marcus asked how the ship knew his name, and VIGIL explained that it had been monitoring human genetic databases for 60 years, searching for the one person who carried the right combination of markers in their blood. The ship had been built to bond with a single human lineage, and Marcus was the last living member of that line. He was the great-grandnephew of Commodore Alara Vance, through a family connection that had been hidden and buried to protect him and his ancestors from enemies who would have killed them. To prevent this very moment, Marcus felt his legs grow weak and he leaned against the warm wall of the corridor. As VIGIL continued to speak, the AI guided him deeper into the ship, through chambers filled with technology that looked decades ahead of anything in the current Terran fleet. VIGIL explained that the adamantine resolve had been built as part of something called the Prometheus Initiative, a secret project that brought together the greatest minds in human history to create a weapon that could stand against an enemy that most people had never heard of. That enemy was called the Dominion. Marcus knew the name only from old stories and legends that most people did not believe anymore. Dominion was supposed to be an ancient alien hegemony that had conquered 1,000 species across the galaxy before humanity even learned to make fire. They were supposed to be invincible and unstoppable, and they were supposed to have mysteriously withdrawn from the region of space that humans now occupied. VIGIL told Marcus that the stories were true but incomplete. The Dominion had not withdrawn by choice. They had been driven back 60 years ago. A small fleet of human ships had encountered a Dominion scouting force at the edge of the Kepler colonies, and the battle had been a massacre. Human ships fell one after another, and it seemed like nothing could stop the alien advance. Then the adamantine Resolve arrived. VIGIL showed Marcus recordings of that battle on screens that emerged from the walls, and Marcus watched in stunned silence as a single black ship tore through the Dominion formation like a blade through paper weapons that should not have existed, punched through alien shields as if they were made of glass. Defensive systems absorbed attacks that should have vaporized any vessel in less than an hour. The adamantine Resolve destroyed the entire Dominion force and sent the survivors fleeing back to their territory with a message that this region of space was no longer easy prey. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Commodore Elara Vance died in that battle, her body failing from the strain of commanding a ship that pushed human limits to their breaking point. Without her genetic signature, the ship shut down and refused to respond to anyone else. The military could not use it, and they could not study it, and they could not even open the doors, so they hid it away and waited and hoped that someday someone from her bloodline would come to claim it. Marcus asked why they had not simply told his family about this, and VIGIL explained that they had tried, but the genetic markers were recessive and unpredictable, and they had appeared in dozens of false candidates over the years. People who carried some of the right genes, but not all of them. Marcus was different. He carried the complete sequence, a perfect match that the ship recognized as family. Vigil led Marcus to the bridge, a circular room at the heart of the vessel with a command chair that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Screens surrounded the chair on all sides, and they displayed information about every system on the ship in formats that Marcus found strangely intuitive. He sat down in the chair and felt something click into place inside his mind. A connection that was not physical, but was absolutely real. The ship shared its memories with him, and Marcus saw Elara Vance for the first time. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes who looked more like an engineer than a warrior. She stood on this same bridge 60 years ago, and she spoke to VIGIL in a voice that carried the weight of someone who knew she was about to die. Her final message was simple. She said that the Dominion would return someday, and that when they did, humanity would need the Resolve, and whoever inherited it. She said that she trusted the ship to find the right person. She said that she was sorry she could not be there to help. The recording ended, and Marcus sat in silence for a long time while VIGIL waited patiently. Finally, Marcus asked the question that had been building in his mind since he stepped aboard. He asked why the Dominion had not returned in 60 years if they were such a threat. VIGIL's response made his blood run cold. The AI displayed a star map showing the edge of human territory, and Marcus saw dozens of red dots appearing in patterns that looked like the first drops of rain before a storm. Dominion scout vessels had been detected 3 months ago. They were mapping human defenses and testing response times and sending information back to their territory after 60 years of silence. The Dominion was preparing to return, and this time, humanity had no secret weapon ready to stop them except for one engineer who had just inherited the most powerful ship ever built and had no idea how to use it. Marcus stared at the red dots on the map and felt the weight of worlds settling onto his shoulders. VIGIL asked him what he wanted to do. Marcus did not have an answer yet, but he knew that running away was not an option. His ancestor had given her life to protect humanity, and now the responsibility had passed to him. Whether he was ready for it or no, told VIGIL to show him everything. The ship began to teach him, and Marcus Chum started to understand why the universe had bigger plans for him after all. 3 weeks passed, and Marcus felt like he was drowning in information that refused to make sense. No matter how hard he tried to understand it, the adamantine Resolve was the most advanced weapon ever created by human hands, and Vigil had been trying to train him in combat tactics and fleet maneuvers and strategic thinking, but nothing seemed to stick. Marcus was not a soldier. He had never fired a weapon in anger, and he had never commanded anyone, and he had certainly never been responsible for the fate of billions of lives. Every night he lay in the captain's quarters and stared at the ceiling, and wondered if the universe had made a terrible mistake by choosing him on the 23rd day. Marcus made a decision. He contacted Director Yamato at Depot Omega 9 and told her that he wanted to transfer command of the ship to the Terran Navy because they had trained officers who would know how to use it properly. Director Yamato was silent for a long moment, and then she told Marcus something that changed everything. She said that they had considered this possibility years ago and had consulted with the original designers of the Prometheus Initiative. The ship could not be transferred. The adamantine resolve was designed to bond with one person and one person only, and that bond was permanent until death if Marcus walked away from the ship. It would shut down again and wait for the next generation of his bloodline to produce a suitable heir. That could take another 60 years, or it could take never. Dominion scouts were already probing human defenses, and experts estimated that a full invasion force would arrive within 2 years. If Marcus abandoned this ship now, humanity would face the Dominion without its most powerful weapon. The call ended, and Marcus sat alone on the bridge, feeling trapped and angry and terrified all at once. He asked Vigil why the designers had created such a stupid system, and the AI gave him an answer that he did not expect. Vigil explained that the bonding system was not a flaw but a feature. The ship was designed to be more than a weapon, and it needed more than a pilot. It needed a partner who could grow with it and adapt to it and push it beyond its designed limits in ways that no military training could predict. The Dominion had conquered 1,000 species because they followed patterns and rules and doctrines that made them predictable. The Prometheus Initiative believed that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to improvise, and that strength could not be trained into someone. It had to be natural. Marcus laughed bitterly and said that he was just an engineer who fixed broken things, and that there was nothing special about him. Vigil asked Marcus to come to the engine room. Marcus followed the blue lights through the corridors until he reached a massive chamber filled with equipment that hummed with barely contained power. Vigil asked Marcus what he saw. Marcus looked around, and his engineer's mind began to catalog everything automatically. He saw power conduits that were running at 60% efficiency, when they could easily handle 80. He saw cooling systems that were using outdated circulation patterns. He saw weapon charging systems that could be improved with a simple modification that would increase their output by at least 15%. He started talking without thinking, pointing out problems and solutions and improvements that seemed obvious to him even though he had only been on the ship for 3 weeks. When he finally stopped talking, he realized that he had been speaking for almost 2 hours. Vigil displayed a hologram of Commodore Vance standing in this same engine room 60 years ago. She was pointing at the same systems and talking about the same problems and suggesting the same solutions. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Vigil explained that Alara Vance was not chosen to command the adamantine resolve because she was a brilliant tactician or a fearless warrior. She was chosen because she was an engineer. The Prometheus Initiative understood something that the military never did. In a fight against a technologically superior enemy, you did not need someone who knew how to use weapons according to the manual. You needed someone who could rewrite the manual in the middle of a battle. You needed someone who understood how systems worked and how they failed and how to push them beyond their limits when everything was falling apart. You needed someone who could fix things that were not supposed to be fixable. Marcus stood in the engine room and felt something shifting inside his mind. He had spent 3 weeks trying to become a soldier because he thought that was what the ship needed. But the ship did not need a soldier. It needed him. It needed an engineer who could look at a problem and find solutions that nobody else could see. For the first time since he stepped aboard, Marcus stopped fighting against himself. He walked over to the power conduits that he had noticed earlier and asked Vigil for access to the modification systems. The AI complied, and Marcus began to work. He adjusted the conduit configurations and watched the efficiency climb from 60% to 75%. He rebooted the cooling systems and gained an extra 10% capacity. He modified the weapon charging sequences, and VIGIL reported that the main guns would now fire 20% faster than their original specifications with each change. Marcus felt the ship responding to him in new ways. Systems that had been locked suddenly became available. Sections of the vessel that had been dark for 60 years began to light up as the adamantine resolve recognized that its new partner understood it in ways that mattered. VIGIL told Marcus that he had just unlocked more systems in one day than Elara Vance had unlocked in her first year aboard the ship. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. He was not a soldier, and he would never be one, but he was an engineer, and that was exactly what humanity needed. He asked VIGIL to show him what else needed fixing. The AI displayed a list of systems that had been dormant since Elara Vance's death, waiting for someone who could understand them well enough to bring them back online. The list was very long. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He had a lot of fixing to do, and the Dominion was not going to wait forever. The Dominion Vanguard arrived 8 months earlier than anyone expected, and the first reports sent waves of panic through every human world in the sector. 3 massive vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the colony of New Helsinki, and each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built. They were shaped like great dark pyramids, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with an inner fire, and they moved through space with a grace that made human ships look clumsy. By comparison, the Terran Navy mobilized everything they had. 47 warships gathered to defend New Helsinki, representing the combined might of 3 different fleet commands and carrying the hopes of 12 billion people who lived in that system. The battle lasted less than an hour. Dominion weapons cut through human shields like they were made of paper human. Missiles and energy beams splashed harmlessly against alien defenses that seemed to absorb everything thrown at them. 12 Terran ships were destroyed in the first engagement, and another 8 were crippled beyond repair. The rest retreated in desperate chaos while the Dominion vessels advanced toward the helpless colony below. Admiral Sarah Constantine sent an emergency message to Marcus, Chung on a channel that only he could receive. She begged him to bring the adamantine resolve into battle because nothing else could stop what was coming. Marcus had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment, but he still felt fear clawing at his stomach as he powered up the ship's systems. VIGIL asked him if he was ready, and Marcus said no, but he was going anyway. Adamantine resolve jumped to New Helsinki in a flash of light that left ripples in the fabric of space itself. Marcus arrived in the middle of chaos. Burning wreckage filled the void around the planet and desperate distress. Calls flooded every communication channel. The 3 Dominion ships had arranged themselves in a triangle formation above the colony, and they were charging weapons that would turn the surface into molten glass. Marcus studied the enemy vessels on his screens, and his engineer's mind began to analyze them automatically. Noticed that their shields pulsed at a specific frequency every few seconds. He noticed that their weapons drew power from a central core that created a brief vulnerability. When they fired, he noticed patterns that the military tacticians had missed because they were looking for weaknesses. Instead of understanding systems, VIGIL asked what he wanted to do, and Marcus gave orders that no military commander would have considered instead of charging at the enemy. He told VIGIL to broadcast a specific electromagnetic frequency toward the Dominion ships. I complied, and Marcus watched as the alien shields flickered for just a moment. That flicker told him everything he needed to know. Dominion shield technology worked on principles similar to human shields, but more advanced, and that meant the same weaknesses existed if you knew where to look. Marcus recalibrated the Resolve's weapons to match the frequency he had detected, and then he told Vigil to fire. The first shot from the adamantine Resolve punched through the lead Dominion ship's shields like they were not even there. Aliens had never encountered an enemy who could adapt to their technology in the middle of a battle, and their response was slow and confused. Marcus pressed the advantage. He dove the resolve toward the enemy formation and fired again and again. Each shot calibrated to exploit the weaknesses he had identified. The Dominion ships tried to adjust their shields, but Marcus adjusted faster, changing frequencies and attack patterns with every volley. The second Dominion ship launched a swarm of fighters toward the Resolve. Hundreds of small craft that filled the space around him like angry insects. A military commander would have tried to outmaneuver them or shoot them down one by one. Marcus did neither. He overloaded the ship's sensor array in a controlled burst that created an electromagnetic cascade spreading outward in all directions. The Dominion fighters lost their navigation systems and began crashing into each other and spinning helplessly into the void. The void? Surviving Terran ships watched in amazement. As a single vessel did what their entire fleet could not, the Dominion flagship turned its main weapon toward the adamantine Resolve and fired a beam of energy so powerful that it would have vaporized any ship in the human fleet instantly. Marcus had been waiting for this. He had spent months studying the ship's systems, and he had found something that Alara Vance never had time to test. An experimental energy absorption matrix buried deep in the Resolve's defensive systems. He activated it in the split second before the beam struck. The adamantine Resolve did not just survive the attack, it absorbed it. VIGIL reported that the ship's power reserves had just increased by 300% as the enemy's own weapon became fuel for the Resolve systems. Marcus channeled that stolen energy into a single devastating counterattack. A lance of pure destruction erupted from the adamantine Resolve and struck the Dominion flagship directly in its central power core. The explosion was visible from the surface of New Helsinki. The remaining two Dominion ships began to retreat, their confident advance turning into desperate flight as they realized they were facing something they could not understand. Marcus let them go. He wanted them to carry a message back to their masters. He wanted them to report that the weapon that had stopped them 60 years ago was back and that it was stronger than ever. The surviving Terran ships formed up around the adamantine Resolve, and Admiral Constantine's voice came through the communication system. Shaking with emotion, she asked Marcus how he had done the impossible. Marcus looked at the screens showing the retreating enemy and the celebrating human crews and the people on New Helsinki, who was still alive because of what he had done. He told the Admiral that he had not done anything impossible. He had just fixed a few problems and made some improvements and found solutions that nobody else had looked for. He told her that was what engineers did. VIGIL displayed a private message on Marcus's screen, a simple acknowledgement that Alara Vance would have been proud. Marcus nodded and began running diagnostics on the systems he had pushed to their limits during the battle. The Dominion would return with a larger force and better preparations. He needed to be ready. He needed to keep improving. The galaxy had just learned that humanity was not easy prey, and Marcus intended to make sure they never forgot that lesson. The news of the victory at New Helsinki spread across human space like wildfire, and Marcus Chun became a name that every child knew within weeks. Politicians wanted to meet him, and military leaders wanted to study his tactics, and journalists wanted to tell his story to the galaxy. But Marcus ignored all of them because he had more important work to do. The Terran government sent their best scientists and engineers to examine the adamantine Resolve with requests to replicate its technology. For the rest of the fleet, they believed that if they could build more ships like the Resolve, humanity would be safe from the Dominion forever. Marcus let them examine the ship, and he answered their questions, and he showed them systems that made their eyes go wide with wonder. But after 3 months of study, the scientists reported that they could not replicate the technology. The Resolve was too advanced, and its systems were too integrated, and its Power requirements were beyond anything humanity could currently produce. The government officials were disappointed, but Marcus was not surprised. He had spent enough time with the ship to understand that copying it was never the point. Vigil asked Marcus to come to a section of the ship that he had never visited before. A small chamber deep in the vessel's core that contained nothing but a single display screen. The AI told Marcus that this was where Alara Vance had spent her final hours, and that she had left something here that only her true heir was meant to see. The screen activated and showed Alara Vance sitting in the same chamber 60 years ago. She looked tired and pale, and Marcus could see that she knew her time was running out. She spoke directly to the camera, as if she could see through time. To the person who would eventually watch this recording, she said that she needed to explain something important about the Adamantine Resolve, and about the Prometheus Initiative, and about what it all really meant. The ship was never meant to be a weapon. It was meant to be a message. The scientists who built the Resolve understood something fundamental about the Dominion that nobody else had figured out. The alien hegemony had conquered 1,000 species across millions of years because every species they encountered tried to fight them the same way. They built bigger weapons and stronger shields and faster ships, and the Dominion simply adapted and overwhelmed them with superior numbers and resources. The Dominion was patient and methodical, and they followed patterns that had worked for longer than humanity had existed. They could not be beaten by building a better weapon, because they would always build a better weapon in response. The Prometheus Initiative was not about creating a ship that could destroy the Dominion. It was about demonstrating a capability that the Dominion had never encountered. Humans did not just use technology. They partnered with it. They improved it in real time. They found solutions that were not supposed to exist. They adapted faster than any species the Dominion had ever faced, because adaptation was built into their nature at the deepest level. A single human engineer with the right tools could stand against an empire, not because of superior firepower, but because of the uniquely human ability to solve problems that had no predetermined answers. Alara Vance said that she was not the weapon, and neither was the Resolve. The weapon was humanity itself. The ship was just proof of what humans could do when they stopped trying to copy other species and started being truly human. She said that whoever inherited the ship would face a choice. They could try to keep the Resolve secrets and use them as a shield to protect humanity from behind, or they could share those secrets with everyone and trust that humanity would rise to meet the challenge. Alara Vance chose the second option, but she died before she could implement it. She hoped that her heir would make the same choice. The recording ended, and Marcus sat in silence for a long time. He thought about the scientists who had failed to replicate this Resolve's technology, and he realized that they had been asking the wrong question. They should not have been trying to copy the ship. They should have been trying to understand the principles behind it. He should have been teaching them instead of just showing them. Marcus made his decision. He contacted every major university and research institution in human space, and he invited them to send their best students to study aboard the Adamantine Resolve, not to copy its technology, but to learn how to think the way its creators had thought. He transmitted the complete philosophical and engineering principles behind the Prometheus Initiative to every human world, with instructions to teach them in every school. He shared the recordings of his battle at New Helsinki, with detailed explanations of how he had analyzed the Dominion systems and found their weaknesses. He did not give humanity a fish. He taught them how to fish. The response was overwhelming. Within a year, young engineers across human space were approaching problems in new ways and making breakthroughs that nobody had expected. New ship designs emerged that were not copies of the Resolve, but were inspired by its principles. New weapons and shields and propulsion systems appeared that pushed the boundaries of what humanity thought was possible. The Dominion returned 2 years later with a fleet of 50 ships, expecting to crush the humans who had embarrassed them at New Helsinki. They found something they did not expect. The Terran fleet had grown and changed in ways that did not make sense to the alien commanders. Human ships were not following standard tactics because there were no standard tactics anymore. Every captain was an engineer who understood their vessel at a fundamental level. Every crew was trained to adapt and improvise and solve problems in real time. The battle was not easy, and humanity paid a price in lives and ships, but they won, and they won again when the Dominion sent 100 ships, and again when they sent 200. Each time the aliens returned with new weapons and new strategies, and each time humanity adapted faster than they could predict. Marcus watched from the bridge of the Adamant Resolve as the latest Dominion fleet retreated in confusion, and he felt something he had not expected. He felt proud, not of himself but of his species. He looked at the display screen and saw a final message from Alara Vance that he had not noticed before. A recording that was set to play only after the first major victory. She appeared on the screen with a smile that made her look younger than Marcus had ever seen her. She said that if this message was playing, it meant her heir had made the right choice. She said that she had always believed in humanity, even when nobody else did. She said one final thing that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. She said that she was never the weapon, and neither was the resolve, and neither was whoever was watching this message. They were just people who were stubborn enough to keep fixing things until they worked. That was what made them human. That was what made them dangerous. Marcus smiled and looked out at the stars where the Dominion was retreating. They would come back eventually with bigger fleets and new strategies. But it did not matter anymore, because now they were not facing one unrivaled battleship. They were facing a species that built unrivaled battleships the way other species breathed. Marcus turned back to his console and began running calculations for improvements to the next generation of human warships. There was always more work to do. There were always more problems to solve. There was always something to fix. And Marcus Chun, engineer from a forgotten station at the edge of nowhere, was exactly where he was supposed to be. He got back to work. The universe was watching, and humanity was just getting started.